The warning. The first thing Daniel noticed about Black Pine Forest was the silence. There were no birds, no insects, not even the sound of wind moving through the trees. Just a strange, heavy silence that seemed to follow him everywhere. Daniel had come to the forest with his older brother, Ryan, and their friend Marcus for a 3-day winter camping trip. They had heard stories about people disappearing in these woods, but they laughed them off as local legends. At the entrance, they found an old wooden warning sign that said visitors should stay on the marked trail. Beneath the warning, someone had carved 3 words into the wood. Don't follow the voice. That evening, while they were setting up their tents, an old ranger approached them. His face looked tired, and his eyes kept moving toward the trees. "You boys shouldn't stay after dark," he said. Ryan laughed and told him they were prepared. The ranger looked directly at Daniel and quietly said, "If you hear someone calling your name tonight, don't answer." Then he walked away without another word. Later that night, the 3 friends sat around their campfire while snow slowly fell around them. Suddenly, Daniel heard something between the trees. "Daniel." He froze. The voice sounded exactly like his mother. "Daniel." Ryan looked at him and asked what was wrong. Daniel stared into the darkness and said, "My mom just called me." Marcus slowly turned toward the forest and whispered, "I didn't hear anything." Then the voice came again, closer this time. "Daniel." Daniel stood up, staring between the trees. And somewhere deep inside the forest, something moved. Daniel refused to enter the forest that night, and Ryan convinced him that someone was probably playing a joke on them. They returned to their tents and tried to sleep. But around 3 in the morning, Daniel woke up to the sound of something walking around their campsite. Slow footsteps pressed into the snow. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Daniel quietly opened his tent and saw footprints surrounding the campsite. But they were not normal human footprints. They were extremely long and narrow, as if something enormous had walked through the snow on unnaturally thin feet. Daniel woke Ryan, and Ryan grabbed a flashlight before stepping outside. Marcus joined them, and they stared at the strange trail. "What kind of animal makes these?" Marcus whispered. Ryan followed the footprints for a few feet before stopping. The trail suddenly changed direction and went straight toward their tents, then stopped as if whatever made them had been standing there, watching them sleep. Marcus suddenly pointed toward the trees. A tall shape stood between the trunks. It looked like a person, but it was far too tall. Daniel raised his flashlight and the beam reached the figure. For 1 second, they saw a pale face, dark eyes, and a strange expression that looked almost like a smile. Then the flashlight flickered and the figure disappeared. Ryan immediately grabbed their supplies. "We're leaving," he said. But when they reached the trail, the forest looked completely different, and they could no longer find the way back. The voice. Morning never truly came. A gray light appeared above the trees, but the forest remained dark and cold. Their compass spun uselessly. Their phones showed no signal, and every path seemed to lead deeper into the woods. After several hours, they discovered an abandoned cabin with a broken door. Inside, they found an old fireplace, broken furniture, and dozens of scratches covering the walls. Marcus discovered a journal hidden underneath a rotten floorboard. The first pages were almost unreadable, But one sentence appeared again and again. It learns your voice, Daniel. Continued reading and discovered that the journal belonged to a hunter named Thomas, who had disappeared decades earlier. Thomas wrote about a creature that lived deep within the forest. He called it a Wendigo. According to the journal, the creature did not simply hunt people. It watched them. It learned their voices and copied the voices of people they loved. Then it used those voices to make them leave the safety of their shelter. Suddenly, someone knocked on the cabin door. 3 slow knocks. Daniel froze. A voice came from outside. Ryan. It was Marcus's voice, but Marcus was standing right beside them. His face went pale. The voice outside spoke again. Ryan. Open the door. Ryan slowly stepped backward. Then the voice changed. This time, it sounded like Daniel's mother, Daniel. Please help me. Daniel covered his ears while Marcus whispered. Don't listen. The knocking stopped. For several seconds, there was complete silence. Then something slowly scratched across the cabin door, followed by a whisper. I know you're... The hunter's journal. They stayed inside the cabin until sunset while Daniel continued reading the journal. Thomas had written that the Wendigo was not like an ordinary animal. It could move through the forest without making a sound, imitate voices, and confuse people until they could no longer tell reality from illusion. But there was something else. Thomas claimed the creature became stronger whenever people became afraid. Daniel looked at Ryan and asked how they could stop it. Ryan turned the page, but the final section was almost destroyed. Only a few words remained. Never let it know you're afraid, another sentence said. The fire keeps it away. Marcus looked toward the fireplace. We need to keep the fire burning, he whispered. They gathered whatever dry wood they could find and kept the flames alive. That night, the creature returned. They heard footsteps outside. Then Ryan heard his father's voice. Ryan. It's me. Ryan froze because his father had died years earlier. The voice became louder. Ryan, open the door. Ryan's breathing became faster. But Daniel grabbed his arm and told him not to listen. Suddenly, the creature screamed. The sound was not human, and it shook the cabin walls. The windows rattled and the fire nearly went out. Something enormous began running around the cabin. It moved unbelievably fast, but then everything suddenly stopped. Marcus looked through a crack in the wooden wall, and his face turned white. Daniel asked what he saw. Marcus whispered, It's standing on the roof. The roof. The creature remained on the roof for almost an hour. They could hear its slow movements above. Then scratch, pause, then complete silence. Marcus looked through the window, but nothing was visible. Ryan decided they had to leave before the darkness became complete. They packed their supplies and opened the cabin door. Fresh footprints covered the snow, but there was no creature anywhere. They followed the trail away from the cabin and eventually discovered an old wooden bridge crossing a frozen river. On the other side stood an abandoned ranger station. It looked like their only chance to escape. They crossed quickly, but halfway across, Daniel heard someone behind him whisper his name. He turned, but nobody was there. Then he looked down. Beneath the frozen river, a long shadow moved under the ice. Marcus suddenly shouted, Run! The ice cracked, and they sprinted toward the other side. Behind them, the frozen surface broke apart and something climbed onto the bridge. Daniel looked back and saw the Wendigo clearly for the first time. It was impossibly tall and thin, with unnaturally long limbs and pale skin that almost disappeared against the snow. Its eyes were completely black. Its face carried a disturbing smile. Ryan grabbed Daniel and shouted, Don't look at it. They reached the ranger station and slammed the door behind them. Outside, the creature stood silently in the snow. Then it spoke in Ryan's voice, "Daniel." Ryan looked at his brother and whispered, "I didn't say that." The ranger station. Inside the ranger station, they discovered old maps covering the walls. One map showed the forest, while another showed tunnels beneath it. Daniel realized that the ranger station had been built over an old mining site. Marcus found an old radio and switched it on. Static filled the room before a voice suddenly came through. "Is anyone there?" Ryan grabbed the microphone and told them they were trapped in Black Pine Forest and needed help. After several seconds of static, the voice answered, "Don't trust the person beside you." Everyone froze. Ryan slowly looked at Marcus, and Marcus looked at Daniel. The radio continued, "The Wendigo can copy voices, but it cannot copy memories." Ryan asked what that meant. The voice told them to ask each other questions that only the real person would know. Daniel immediately asked Marcus about a childhood memory, and Marcus answered correctly. Marcus then asked Ryan something personal, and Ryan answered correctly. Finally, Ryan asked Daniel a question, and Daniel answered. For a moment, they relaxed. Then the radio spoke again. "You forgot one thing." Ryan asked what they had forgotten. The voice whispered, "Sometimes it doesn't replace you." The room became silent. "Sometimes," the voice continued, "it follows you." Suddenly, the lights went out. Something knocked over a chair. Marcus screamed. Daniel turned on his flashlight, but Marcus was gone. Ryan grabbed Daniel and asked where he was. Then they heard Marcus's voice from the hallway, "Guys." Daniel raised the flashlight and saw Marcus standing at the end of the corridor, completely still. Ryan whispered that they ran into a storage room and locked the door behind them. Outside, Marcus's voice echoed through the station, begging them to come out. Daniel almost opened the door, but Ryan stopped him. They found an old emergency map showing a tunnel that led from the ranger station to an old road several miles outside the forest. They decided it was their only chance. They entered the tunnel, which was narrow, dark, and freezing. Their flashlight batteries were slowly dying. After several minutes, they heard footsteps behind them. One set, then two, then three. Daniel counted carefully. There were 3 people walking behind them, but only 2 of them were actually inside the tunnel. They continued forward without looking back. Then Daniel heard Marcus's voice again. "Daniel." He almost turned, but Ryan grabbed his shoulder and told him not to. The voice continued, "Daniel, I know where the exit is." They kept moving until the tunnel opened into a huge underground chamber. In the center was an old abandoned camp. Someone had lived there for years. Animal remains surrounded an old fire pit, and dozens of names were carved into the walls. Some had been scratched out. Others were still visible. Daniel suddenly saw one name that made him freeze. Thomas, the hunter from the journal. Below his name was another name. Ryan. Daniel stared at it and told. Ryan stepped backward and said he had never been there. Then they heard a scratching sound behind them. Slowly, something moved in the darkness. The Wendigo had followed them into the tunnel. Ryan found an old lantern and managed to light it. The creature immediately stopped moving. Daniel remembered what the journal had said. Fire kept the Wendigo away. They gathered whatever they could find and created a larger flame. The Wendigo remained at the edge of the darkness, watching them. It did not attack. Instead, It began speaking. This time, it used Daniel's own voice. Ryan, Daniel felt a chill run through him. The creature continued. You know what happens next, Ryan? Stared at it while the Wendigo began repeating memories from their childhood, including their first fishing trip, a birthday celebration, and conversations with their father. Daniel realized something terrifying. It isn't copying our voices, he whispered. Ryan looked at him. Daniel continued. It knows our memories. The creature slowly stepped closer. The fire flickered, and Daniel threw another piece of wood into the flames. The Wendigo screamed and moved backward. Ryan suddenly noticed an old tunnel behind the creature and shouted that they should run. They sprinted toward it while the Wendigo chased them. Its footsteps shook the ground. They reached the tunnel entrance, but the creature grabbed Ryan. Daniel turned and saw his brother struggling. Ryan shouted, "Go!" Daniel refused to leave him and grabbed a burning branch from the fire, holding it toward the creature. The Wendigo released Ryan, and both brothers ran into the tunnel. Behind them, rocks began falling from the ceiling. They sprinted toward a distant light, and finally they saw the forest road. They had escaped, or at least they thought they HDA. Snowplow found Daniel and Ryan several hours later and took them to safety. They told the police everything about the forest, the cabin, the ranger station, the underground tunnels, and the creature. Nobody believed them. 3 days later, police searched Black Pine Forest. They found the cabin, the ranger station, and the underground tunnels. But there was no evidence of any creature. There was only one strange discovery. Marcus's backpack was found inside the abandoned cabin. Marcus himself was never found. The police assumed he had become lost somewhere in the forest, but Daniel refused to believe it. Weeks passed, and Daniel returned home. He tried to forget everything that had happened, but one night he heard something outside his bedroom. Window, scratch, pause, scratch. He looked toward the glass, but nothing was there. Then his phone suddenly rang. The number was unknown. Daniel answered, but there was only silence. Then he heard Marcus whisper, "Daniel." Daniel dropped the phone. The voice continued. "I found the way home." Daniel slowly looked toward his bedroom door. It was slightly open, even though he clearly remembered closing it. Then he heard footsteps in the hallway. His mother's voice called from downstairs, "Daniel, come down here." Daniel froze because his mother was away that night. The footsteps stopped outside his room. Then a voice whispered through the door, "You shouldn't have left me." Daniel didn't open the door. He stayed completely silent and waited until morning. When he finally opened it, nobody was there. But 3 long footprints were visible in the hallway. They led toward the front door and suddenly stopped. Years later, Daniel still refuses to talk about Black Pine Forest. Ryan moved to another state, and Marcus was never found. The official story says Marcus disappeared during a camping trip. But Daniel knows the truth. The Wendigo never needed to chase them forever. It only needed them to remember it. Legends say creatures like the Wendigo don't simply live in forests. They live in fear. They wait for people to tell their stories. Every time someone whispers its name, every time someone searches for it, and every time someone enters the woods looking for proof, the legend seems to grow stronger. Daniel once asked the old ranger why the warning sign said, "Don't follow the voice." The ranger gave him one answer: Because the first voice you hear will sound like someone you loved. Daniel never went back to Black Pine Forest, but sometimes, late at night, he still hears footsteps outside his window. 3 slow steps, then silence. And one night, Daniel received a message from an unknown number. It contained only 4 words. "I'm still behind you." Daniel stared at the screen and refused to turn around. Because after everything he had learned, he knew one terrifying thing for certain: the Wendigo doesn't always chase you. Sometimes it simply waits for you to back and look.